always the most important thing to me also. Some of the things that have been said about me, it's not true. I offer my apologies to my son and to his mother and her family. I didn't do this like they said.
What else do you want me to know?
I believe that's it.
A 5-year-old boy suddenly vanished off the face of the earth, defying a relentless 13-year manhunt by the FBI. No traces, no leads. The child seemed completely erased from existence. Yet, the most chilling detail of this case isn't the disappearance itself, but a terrifying paradox. The victim was living a flawlessly normal life, growing up happy and thriving, with absolutely no idea his true identity had been stolen. What actually happened inside that invisible 13-year void? And how did a seemingly harmless computer glitch accidentally tear open one of the most sophisticated psychological manipulation schemes in history? The year was 2015. It was the height of the fall semester, a time when high school seniors across America are consumed by the anxieties and excitements of college applications. For an 18-year-old student in Cleveland, Ohio, known to his friends and teachers simply as JJ, this meant filling out his FAFSA. It was supposed to be a routine bureaucratic step toward his academic future. But when he entered his social security number, the federal database returned a hard error. His information did not match the national registry. It was a digital roadblock, a tiny invisible glitch in the system that was about to violently tear open a 13-year-old cold case. However, before the authorities ever got involved, Julian's own digital footprint revealed a mind grappling with a terrifying, world-shattering reality. Sometime before the truth broke on national television, he turned to the internet for help. On an anonymous Reddit legal advice forum, the teenager posted a desperate, haunting plea that would later become a focal point for criminal psychologists analyzing this case. I found out there's a problem with my papers. It seems like I'm a missing child, but please tell me, how can I get legal documents for school without getting my dad in trouble? This single, agonizing question shatters everything we think we know about the dynamic between a perpetrator and a victim. It goes entirely against the fundamental survival instinct, typically seen in abducted individuals. In a conventional crime narrative, the captive's ultimate goal is escape, exposure, and justice. Yet here, we bear witness to a profound psychological paradox. The victim is actively, frantically trying to protect the very architect of his own captivity. Julian wasn't looking for a rescue team. He was searching for a legal loophole to save the man who had stolen his true identity. To Julian, Bobby Hernandez was not a manipulative criminal. He was the protector, the provider, the dad, the only foundation of reality the boy had known since he was 5 years old. It is a chilling testament to how completely a child's reality can be rewritten, demonstrating that when a captor wears the face of a loving parent, the invisible chains of emotional attachment are far stronger than physical locks. Ultimately, Julian's desperate attempt to quietly fix his papers was destined to fail, thanks to the unsung hero of this story, his high school guidance counselor. When Julian brought the Social Security mismatch to her office, she could have easily dismissed it as a standard administrative error, a transposed digit, or a simple clerical mistake from a government office. Most educators would simply advise the student to make a phone call and try again. But her meticulous intuition told her otherwise. She refused to brush the anomaly under the rug. Digging deeper into the discrepancies, the counselor bypassed routine administrative channels and made a fateful decision to cross-reference his information with an unexpected system, the database of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEX. When the search results finally loaded, the screen did not show an administrative glitch. It showed the face of a little boy from Alabama who had vanished into thin air 13 years ago. In a matter of seconds, a routine college application unraveled a masterful, decade-long illusion. How does a man successfully disappear with a 5-year-old child in modern America? In an era where digital footprints are increasingly difficult to erase, vanishing into thin air requires more than just crossing state lines. It requires a flawless illusion. For 13 years, Bobby Hernandez managed to evade federal law enforcement, private investigators, and a nationwide manhunt, settling completely under the radar in Cleveland, Ohio. His secret was not in hiding in the shadows, but rather in living perfectly in plain sight. To pull off this decade-long deception, Bobby did not just invent a random alias out of thin air. Fabricated names without a paper trail eventually hit administrative brick walls. Instead, he utilized a much darker, far more calculated method to slip through the cracks of the system. As District Attorney Brandon Falls revealed during the investigation,
my understanding is that he was applying to college, that there was some discrepancy in his Social Security number because both he and his dad were living under false names.
This chilling method is known in criminal profiling and fraud investigation as ghosting. By stealing the identity of a recently deceased individual, specifically someone who died around the exact time he committed the kidnapping, Bobby effectively resurrected a dead man to serve as his permanent shield. This stolen Social Security number and pre-established history allowed him to bypass standard background checks. It was the master key that enabled him to secure housing, obtain an Ohio identification card, find steady employment, and crucially, enroll his son in the public school system without ever triggering a federal red flag. For over a decade, the ghost of an Alabama man lived a quiet, unassuming life in the Rust Belt. Behind this stolen name, Bobby meticulously constructed a remarkably normal existence. He wasn't a fugitive constantly looking over his shoulder. He was a father building a family. Under the moniker of JJ, Julian thrived. He grew into a straight-A student and a dedicated athlete, surrounded by friends, and completely unaware of his true status as a missing person. Bobby even expanded his household, living with a new partner and other children, creating a seemingly picturesque blended family. To their neighbors, teachers, and coaches, they were just another ordinary household navigating the everyday routines of suburban life. This is perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the entire case. The environment Julian grew up in was not a cold, isolated hideout. It was a warm, structured, and seemingly loving home. Yet, this safe haven was an elaborate stage play, constructed entirely on the foundation of a stolen identity and the devastating deprivation of a mother's right to her child. Every glowing report card, every family dinner, and every childhood memory Julian formed in Cleveland was rooted in a monumental lie, proving that the most impenetrable prisons are often the ones that feel exactly like home. When the Cuyahoga County courtroom doors opened in April 2016 for Bobby Hernandez's sentencing, the media and the public had already written the narrative in their minds. It was supposed to be a straightforward story of justice. A kidnapped child, now a courageous young man, stepping up to the podium to confront the villain who had stolen his life, his true identity, and his mother. The world anticipated a traditional victim's impact statement, one fueled by righteous anger and a demand for maximum legal retribution. Instead, the courtroom witnessed a profound and heartbreaking psychological paradox that left veteran journalists and legal professionals entirely speechless. Julian Hernandez fundamentally refused to play the role of the resentful victim. Standing before the judge, the young man delivered a testimony that shattered the comforting, black and white boundaries of criminal justice. Rather than condemning the man sitting at the defense table, Julian desperately pleaded for his freedom. His words echoed with an agonizing, undeniable sincerity.
He loved me and protected me more than anybody else I've ever known in my life, and whenever I needed something, he would make it happen. Whenever I had a problem, he would listen. When other kids were on drugs and smoking and drinking, just because of him, I never fell into any of that, even when I had numerous opportunities to. He took good care of me and my little sister and our family here. And even the kids that, weren't even his, he still cared about them and made sure that they were doing the right thing. Taking him from me now was just doing the same thing all over again to me.
This extraordinary declaration forces us to dive deep into the psychological battlefield raging within Julian's mind, to the cold, objective lens of the legal system. Bobby Hernandez was a convicted felon who committed a devastating and selfish crime. But to Julian's developing brain, this man was the ultimate symbol of safety, guidance, and unwavering parental love. From the tender age of 5 until he became a legal adult, Bobby was his sole anchor in the world. The human mind is biologically hardwired to bond with its primary caregiver as a fundamental survival mechanism. Julian could intellectually comprehend that his father had broken the law and caused his biological mother immeasurable grief, but emotionally, his heart could only recognize the man who had helped with his homework, celebrated his achievements, and kept him safe. This presents the most tragic reality of familial captivity. The psychological tearing Julian experienced in that courtroom was palpable to everyone watching. He was trapped in an impossible cognitive dissonance, fully aware of the monumental deception, yet absolutely terrified of losing the only parent he actively remembered. He recognized that by incarcerating Bobby, the justice system was inadvertently inflicting a second traumatic separation upon the very victim it was attempting to vindicate. For the spectators, the judge, and the media, Julian's tearful plea completely blurred the clear lines between a ruthless kidnapper and a devoted protector. It highlighted a complex and unsettling truth. A person can commit an unforgivable act of manipulation, yet simultaneously raise a child with genuine care and devotion. In that quiet courtroom, it became painfully clear that the man who had stolen Julian's past was the exact same man Julian credited for his bright future. Before we delve into the dark origins of this case, if you find these deep psychological dives compelling, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button and join the crime evidence community. Your support allows us to continue bringing you detailed, data-driven analyses of the most complex true crime stories. To truly understand the profound paradox of the courtroom 14 years later, we must rewind the clock to August 28, 2002, in the quiet, affluent suburbs of Vestavia Hills, Alabama. This was not a random snatch and grab by an unknown assailant lurking in the shadows. It was a calculated betrayal born from a fractured relationship and misplaced trust. Julian's parents were separated, attempting to navigate the delicate boundaries of shared custody. On that fateful summer morning, Julian's mother operated on a fundamental level of faith. She believed Bobby Hernandez was simply taking their 5-year-old son to his preschool, just like any other normal day. Instead, when she returned home, the vibrant energy of a household with a young child was entirely gone. She was met with a chilling, suffocating silence and a simple, devastating piece of paper left on the table. The note confirmed her absolute worst fear. Bobby had emptied his bank accounts, packed the boy's favorite toys, and vanished. To Julian, growing up in Ohio, Bobby was a hero and a provider. But to the family left behind in Alabama, Bobby was the architect of a relentless waking nightmare. During the 2016 sentencing hearing, the prosecution read a deeply emotional statement from Julian's maternal grandmother, peeling back the carefully constructed facade of the perfect father. Her words cut through the defense's narrative, telling the judge,
"Were deceased. Bobby Hernandez did not kidnap Julian out of any fear for Julian's safety. He did it because he's an angry, controlling, and vengeful person. Julian had a..."
This powerful testimony forces us to re-examine the core motivation behind the crime. While Julian experienced a structured, attentive upbringing, the initial act of taking him was not rooted in pure, selfless parental love. It was rooted in ultimate possession and retaliation. By completely erasing Julian from his mother's life, Bobby committed an act of supreme psychological domination. He weaponized the 5-year-old child to inflict the maximum amount of emotional pain possible on his former partner. The good father persona he maintained in Ohio was, at its very foundation, built on a vindictive need to control the narrative and punish the woman who chose to walk away from him. This dynamic highlights a highly misunderstood aspect of criminology: parental abduction. Society often underestimates the severity of these cases. Because the perpetrator is a biological parent, the public and sometimes even the media tend to downplay the severity of the act, assuming the child is inherently safe. However, the psychological destruction left in its wake is immense. Parental abduction is fundamentally an act of coercive control. It forces an innocent child into a life built entirely on falsehoods and hidden identities, permanently severing them from half of their heritage and the unconditional affection of the left-behind parent. The child becomes an unwitting pawn in a bitter, one-sided adult conflict. Bobby Hernandez successfully manipulated reality for more than a decade, proving that the most profound psychological damage does not always come from strangers in the dark, but sometimes from the very people trusted to provide care and protection. While Julian was thriving under the false identity of JJ in Ohio, achieving excellent grades and building a seemingly normal adolescence, a starkly different reality was unfolding hundreds of miles away in Alabama. This presents the most cruel and jarring contrast of the entire case. Every time Bobby Hernandez attended a parent-teacher conference, cheered at a sporting event, or celebrated a birthday, he was actively sustaining a devastating illusion. He was playing the role of the perfect, dedicated father. But the price of this picturesque suburban life was paid entirely by a woman who had been left behind in an unimaginable void. For Julian's biological mother, time effectively stopped in August 2002. During the 2016 sentencing hearing, the court finally heard the profound depth of her silent agony. Because the emotional toll was too overwhelming for her to deliver the statement herself, renowned attorney Gloria Allred stood before the judge to read the mother's harrowing words into the official record.
During my darkest moments, I considered suicide. I wanted to die. I understand now that only God got me through. Along with my own devastation from losing my son, I worried about what my son was going through. I didn't know if he had a home or whether he was being taken care of.
These heartbreaking words strip away the sanitized, estet, romanticized narrative of the caring kidnapper and expose the raw, devastating consequence of Bobby's actions. In the field of psychology, the mother's experience is defined by a highly complex phenomenon known as ambiguous loss. First categorized by researcher Pauline Boss, ambiguous loss is considered the most stressful and agonizing type of grief because it completely lacks resolution. When a loved one passes away, society provides rituals of funeral, a memorial, a designated period of mourning that help the human brain process the finality of the event and eventually begin the long journey of healing. But when a child vanishes without a trace, there is absolutely no closure. There is no tangible answer, no physical resting place, and no finality. The mother's brain was entirely suspended in a paralyzing, liminal space between clinging to desperate hope and succumbing to profound grief. For an agonizing 4,745 days, she was trapped in an endless loop of psychological torment. She could not truly move forward with her life, because moving on feels like a betrayal. It feels like abandoning her missing child. She had to navigate a world where every single ring of the telephone, every unexpected knock on the front door, or every news bulletin about a discovered missing person could either be the miracle she had continuously prayed for, or the absolute worst news imaginable. She celebrated 13 birthdays facing an empty chair, constantly wondering if her son was safe, if he was happy, or if he even remembered the sound of her voice. This is exactly why this form of family abduction is a uniquely insidious crime. Bobby Hernandez did not just steal a 5-year-old boy, he systematically stole over a decade of a mother's life. He sentenced her to an agonizing emotional purgatory, consciously choosing every single morning to maintain his comfortable lie rather than end her relentless suffering. While Julian looked at Bobby and saw a man who protected and nurtured him, the psychological reality is that this protector was simultaneously acting as the ruthless architect of a mother's unending nightmare. To understand the anatomy of this 13-year deception, we must confront the most disturbing paradox of the Julian Hernandez case. How can a man be, by all external accounts, a dedicated, highly effective father, while simultaneously committing an act of unfathomable cruelty against his child's mother? The answer lies in deconstructing the psychological profile of Bobby Hernandez. Beneath the comforting veneer of the suburban dad who checked homework and attended school events lay a deeply entrenched pathology rooted in absolute obsessive control. The primary mechanism driving Bobby's actions can be understood through the lens of fanatical projection. In the aftermath of a fractured relationship, Bobby likely convinced himself of a highly distorted reality, that he, and only he, possessed the capability to provide the optimal life for his son. By projecting all parental competence onto himself, he rationalized the kidnapping as a necessary intervention. However, this reveals a fundamental flaw in his affection. His love for Julian, while actively demonstrated through daily care, was strictly conditional. It operated on a rigid, unspoken mandate. You will receive the best life possible, but only if you belong entirely to me. This is not a selfless devotion to the child's holistic well-being, which naturally includes the child's right to his mother, but rather an expression of supreme ownership. This insatiable need for possession seamlessly transitions into the second psychological mechanism, narcissistic control. The methodical act of stealing a deceased man's identity and painstakingly forging a new legal existence in Ohio was not the erratic behavior of a panicked parent. It was a demonstration of cold, calculated staging. Narcissistic individuals often view themselves as the ultimate arbiters of their own universe, rewriting the rules to suit their needs. In Cleveland, Bobby successfully built a fabricated world where he cast himself as the undisputed hero and sole provider. Within this tightly controlled environment, Julian was not just a son, he functioned as a direct extension of Bobby's ego. Every time Julian achieved excellent academic grades, displayed exceptional manners, or succeeded in athletics, Bobby absorbed those milestones as personal validation. Julian's success became a living, breathing trophy that Bobby utilized to internally justify his monumental crime, continuously proving to himself his own greatness and the supposed righteousness of his decision. Yet to maintain this elaborate charade for over a decade without suffering a psychological breakdown, Bobby had to employ a massive degree of cognitive dissonance and emotional dissociation. A healthy mind would inevitably buckle under the crushing weight of guilt, acutely aware of the agonizing void inflicted upon the left-behind mother. Bobby survived this by systematically compartmentalizing his psyche. He effectively deactivated his conscience regarding the mother's suffering. Furthermore, he sustained his reality by actively manipulating his son's developing mind. Whenever Julian naturally asked questions about his past or his absent mother, Bobby had to deliver calculated deceptions without hesitation, replacing Julian's genuine early memories with a carefully curated narrative. He fed the child a sanitized, rewritten history, ensuring Julian would never question the legitimacy of their life in Ohio. Ultimately, the psychological profile of Bobby Hernandez forces us to reevaluate our understanding of parental devotion. Was his love for Julian real? In his own distorted psychological framework, yes. But analyzing the underlying architecture of that affection reveals a highly toxic, possessive love. It was a love that demanded the total erasure of the child's true identity and the destruction of a mother's life, demonstrating that the most profound acts of psychological manipulation are often brilliantly disguised as ultimate care. When the world watched Julian Hernandez stand in a courtroom and ask for mercy for the man who had abducted him, the public reaction was a mixture of shock and profound confusion. People naturally asked, why was there no outrage? Why didn't this young man express a deep-seated resentment toward the person who had stolen him from his mother? To the untrained observer, his forgiveness seemed inexplicable, almost frustrating. However, when analyzed through the rigorous scientific lens of psychology, specifically attachment theory, Julian's reaction makes absolute, undeniable sense. His response was not an emotional anomaly. It was a textbook manifestation of human survival instincts, adapting to an impossible reality. To truly understand Julian's mindset, we must take the traditional concept of Stockholm Syndrome and place it directly into a familial context. Classic Stockholm Syndrome typically conjures images of hostages held in a confined space, developing a traumatic, confused bond with their captors over a matter of days or weeks. But familial captivity operates on a much slower, far more insidious timeline. Julian was not held in a basement or restrained by physical force. He was held captive by bedtime stories, shared dinners, help with homework, and daily emotional support. In this specific environment, the captor does not present himself as a villain, but rather as the ultimate guardian. For 13 years, Bobby Hernandez systematically constructed a reality where he was the sole, unwavering pillar of Julian's existence. We must also consider the critical window of human brain development between the tender age of 5 and the threshold of adulthood at 18. During these highly formative years, a child's neurological pathways are actively wiring themselves to depend entirely on their primary caregiver. The human brain is biologically programmed to seek attachment to the person providing shelter, safety, and affection in order to ensure survival. In Julian's meticulously isolated world, Bobby was the absolute center of gravity. He was the undisputed source of life. When a child's brain develops under the exclusive, undirected influence of a single figure, it fundamentally fuses the child's own sense of self with the existence of that caregiver. To the developing adolescent mind, Bobby was not a criminal mastermind. He was the sun around which Julian's entire universe revolved. This creates a devastating psychological paradox. Bobby simultaneously occupied two entirely contradictory roles. He was the life-giving provider, and he was the invisible barrier keeping Julian trapped in a grand illusion. Yet, the human brain is exceptionally adept at protecting itself from complete collapse. If Julian were to suddenly process his father purely as a malicious kidnapper, the resulting cognitive dissonance would instantly shatter his entire identity. It would require him to accept that every happy memory, every holiday celebration, and every comforting moment of his childhood was rooted in a monstrous deception. The psychological weight of such a realization is often too heavy for a young mind to process all at once. Therefore, Julian's public forgiveness and his plea for leniency should never be misinterpreted as a sign of weakness, naivety, or simple manipulation. It is, in fact, a remarkably powerful, subconscious defense mechanism. By forgiving his father and focusing on the positive aspects of his upbringing, Julian's brain was actively working to preserve his sanity. He was fighting to protect the only existential foundation he had ever known. In a moment where his past was suddenly revealed to be a total fabrication and his future was completely unknown, clinging to the love he felt for the man who raised him was Julian's ultimate strategy for psychological survival. When the gavel finally fell in the Cuyahoga County courtroom, The sentence sent shockwaves through the public and legal commentators alike. Bobby Hernandez, the architect behind a flawless 13-year deception, had been indicted on an extensive, formidable list of 15 serious charges. This roster included multiple counts of kidnapping, interference with custody, forgery, and tampering with official government records. Statistically, these overlapping felonies carried a maximum potential penalty that could have kept him behind bars for up to 54 years. Yet, when the final judgment was pronounced, Bobby was ordered to serve a mere 4 years in prison. To the outside observer, this outcome seemed like an astonishing failure of the justice system. How does a man steal a child, erase over a decade of a mother's life, forge federal documents, and walk away with a sentence shorter than a standard college degree? The answer does not lie in a lack of evidence, but rather in a delicate, highly calculated legal strategy known as a plea deal. To comprehend this apparent leniency, we must examine the harsh reality of what a full jury trial would have actually required. If the prosecution had chosen to aggressively pursue the maximum penalty, they would have been forced to present their case in open court, and their star witness, the absolute center of their entire legal argument, would have inevitably been Julian himself. Prosecutors are acutely aware of the human cost of a courtroom battle. Forcing an 18-year-old young man to take the witness stand and testify against the only parental figure he actively remembered would have been an act of profound psychological cruelty. The legal system would be demanding that Julian actively participate in the destruction of his own father. It would compel him to publicly dissect his childhood, categorizing his entire upbringing purely as a crime scene. For a teenager already grappling with the sudden, catastrophic collapse of his identity, being weaponized by the court to secure a lengthy prison sentence would have inflicted a devastating secondary trauma. The justice system was fundamentally designed to protect victims, but in this unique scenario, pursuing absolute legal retribution would have permanently broken the victim. Recognizing this immense psychological risk, the prosecution made a strategic, compassionate concession. They offered a plea agreement. By pleading guilty to a reduced set of charges, Bobby Hernandez bypassed the need for a drawn-out, highly publicized trial. This critical legal maneuver effectively shielded Julian from the agonizing ordeal of cross-examination and the burden of sealing his father's fate. The 4-year sentence was not a reflection of the crime's minimal impact, but rather the heavy, necessary price the legal system paid to preserve the young man's fragile mental state. This outcome exposes a profound vulnerability within the criminal justice framework. When dealing with familial crimes, the law is inherently designed to operate in stark black and white, categorizing actions neatly into right and wrong, perpetrator and victim. However, parental abduction exists in a deeply complex, emotionally saturated gray area. It highlights a systemic loophole where genuine familial affection actively shields the criminal. When the victim fundamentally loves the perpetrator, the courts are left in an impossible bind. They cannot severely punish the offender without simultaneously inflicting deep emotional pain on the victim they are trying to vindicate. The Julian Hernandez case proves that when familial bonds blur the rigid boundaries of criminal acts, true justice becomes an elusive concept, forcing the law to settle for the least damaging compromise. Hollywood has conditioned us to expect reunions in missing persons cases to be triumphant, cinematic climaxes. We are taught to anticipate tear-soaked embraces where decades of agonizing pain instantly evaporate the moment a mother holds her lost child again. But the psychological reality of Julian Hernandez's reunion with his biological mother was not a seamlessly packaged Hollywood ending. Instead, it was a profoundly complex, fragile, and almost disorienting collision of two entirely different realities. After 13 years of forced separation, the moment they finally stood in the same room was not the magical resolution of a tragic story. Rather, it was the daunting, hesitant beginning of an incredibly difficult emotional journey. For 4,745 days, the mother's heart had been desperately searching for a 5-year-old boy. Her internal image of her son was perfectly preserved in the amber of August 2002, a dependent toddler with a specific laugh, holding his favorite toys, and constantly seeking the comfort of her arms. But when the door finally opened, the person walking through was not that little boy. It was an 18-year-old young man. He stood tall, possessed a deep voice, and carried the heavy weight of an entire childhood she had absolutely no part in. She had to undergo a sudden, jarring mental shift, simultaneously mourning the definitive loss of the little boy she would never get back, while trying to welcome the adult who had taken his place. This brings us to the profound psychological paradox of their meeting. Biologically, they were inextricably linked by shared DNA. They were unequivocally mother and son, yet psychologically and emotionally they were absolute strangers. They were absolute strangers. They possessed no shared inside jokes, no recent mutual memories, and no established rhythm of communication. For Julian, He was meeting a woman who held the title of mother, but who, in his everyday reality, felt like an unfamiliar acquaintance. The invisible distance between them in that room was not measured in miles, but in a decade of stolen milestones. The awkwardness was palpable, hanging heavily in the air as they attempted to navigate a relationship that society assumes is purely instinctual, but in reality requires constant, shared experiences to survive. Perhaps the most agonizing psychological hurdle for the mother was confronting the origin of Julian's fully formed personality. As she observed her son noting his polite manners, his academic ambitions, his specific habits, and his worldview, she had to swallow a devastating, bitter truth. Everything that made Julian the impressive young adult standing before her had been carefully shaped and cultivated by the very man who had stolen him. Bobby Hernandez's fingerprints were all over Julian's character. The mother was, in a deeply unsettling way, looking at the masterpiece of her worst enemy. The boy she had given birth to had been entirely raised, educated and molded by the architect of her deepest, most profound pain. Therefore, this reunion was never about picking up where they left off. You cannot magically rewind time or inject 13 years of maternal bonding into a single, tearful embrace. Instead, both Julian and his mother faced the monumental task of constructing a brand new dynamic from absolute zero. They had to learn each other's boundaries, preferences, and emotional triggers with the careful hesitation of two adults meeting for the very first time. It is a slow, delicate process of building trust, completely devoid of fairy tale instant fixes. The true triumph of their reunion lies not in a perfect cinematic ending, but in their mutual quiet courage to slowly bridge an impossible gap, choosing the hard work of building a future together when the past had been completely taken away. In 2019, after serving his 4-year sentence, Bobby Hernandez was officially released from the Ohio prison system. The legal chapter of this extraordinary saga formally closed, and the court documents were archived. However, as we have meticulously explored throughout this psychological case file, the scales of the justice system rarely balance the intricate scales of human emotion. Bobby returned to a society where his actions had permanently altered the trajectory of an entire family, leaving a highly complex legacy of affection and deception that no judge's gavel could ever fully resolve. But the most compelling update from this story does not belong to the perpetrator. It belongs to the survivor. In a modern media landscape that is fiercely obsessed with turning personal tragedies into lucrative spectacles, Julian's subsequent actions are profoundly revealing. He could have easily secured exclusive television interviews, signed high-profile book deals, or authorized dramatized television specials about his 13 years living under a stolen identity. Instead, Julian made a powerful, deliberate choice: absolute and uncompromising silence. Since the highly publicized sentencing hearing in 2016, he has completely withdrawn from the glaring spotlight of the press. This intentional withdrawal is not a sign of avoiding reality. Rather, it is a magnificent declaration of psychological autonomy. For 13 formative years, Julian's reality, his daily routine, and his very name were carefully scripted and controlled by his father. When the truth finally broke, the public and the media eagerly attempted to script his next chapter, wanting to cast him in the permanent role of the tragic confused victim. By actively choosing strict privacy, Julian vehemently refused to become a consumable product of a media tragedy. He redirected his energy entirely toward his academic ambitions, quietly completing his university education and building a professional career. In doing so, he reclaimed the ultimate power that was once taken from him, the absolute right to define his own identity on his own terms. This brings us to the ultimate psychological takeaway of the Julian Hernandez case. Society is deeply conditioned to crave absolute happy endings, neatly wrapped narratives where the lost are magically found, the wrongdoers are punished, and the family instantly returns to a state of unblemished joy. But the stark, uncompromising reality of long-term family abduction dictates that the psychological imprint is permanent. The 13 stolen years cannot be refunded or magically restored. The biological mother and her son can never retrieve the childhood milestones they lost. There is no cinematic reset button that wipes away a decade of complex emotional bonding and simultaneous deception. Yet, within this lingering complexity, there is a profound, quiet triumph. The victory does not lie in a flawless, tear-free reunion, but in the remarkable resilience of the human spirit. Julian's decision to step out of the shadows of the alias JJ and quietly build his future under his real name is the ultimate act of reclaiming a stolen life. He is no longer living an illusion, nor is he permanently defined by a sensational news headline. He is simply Julian Hernandez, the undisputed author of his own authentic future. If this deep psychological exploration has changed how you view the hidden complexities of the human mind, please subscribe to the Crime Evidence channel. We are dedicated to bringing you meticulous, data-driven analyses that look far beyond the superficial headlines. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our upcoming psychological case files. And let us know your thoughts on Julian's remarkable resilience in the comments below.